One thing I always have wondered is, would the Beatles have ever become famous if it wasn't for Brian Epstein, their manager?
You can certainly make the case that perhaps they never even would have gotten a recording contract without Epstein banging on every door in the music business, getting rejected time after time, and just refusing to quit.
And the fascinating thing is Epstein was not a music business insider at all. Yes, he managed his family's record store, but he had no clout in show business. But like you said, he just refused to take no for an answer.
Yeah, the irony of it is just wild. Like, you think of the Beatles as the ultimate 1960s anti-establishment rebels.
Oh, totally. I mean, the hair, the attitude.
Exactly. But they were actually heavily manicured and packaged by a furniture salesman. I mean, Epstein's family ran North End Music Stores, or NMS, in Liverpool.
Wait, NS was originally a furniture store? I actually didn't know that.
Yep. Started by his grandfather. They expanded into appliances and pianos later on. Paul McCartney's dad actually bought a piano from them years before they ever even met.
Oh, wow. That is such a crazy small world detail. So Brian was just like destined to be a local retailer.
Well, he tried to escape it. He had this massive artistic streak and actually got into RDA in London. The Royal Academy of Dramatic Art.
Oh, the super prestigious acting school, like with Peter O'Toole and those guys.
Yeah, same era.
Yeah.
But he dropped out after just 3 terms. He said he felt like an old man at 21 because his family had drilled so much commercial practicality into him.
I guess he couldn't just embrace the bohemian lifestyle. But, it makes sense. I kind of see him as like a theater director spotting raw talent. He walks away with an incredible eye for staging and presentation.
Precisely. So he goes back to Liverpool to manage the NMS record department. And in late 1961, a kid named Raymond Jones asks for a record called My Bonnie by this local group, the Beatles.
And that one request is the spark, right? Because Brian had seen their posters around town, but this makes him actually go track them down.
Yeah. He takes his assistant down to the Cavern Club for a lunchtime gig. And picture this. Brian is in a tailored bespoke suit walking down into this damp, smelly subterranean cellar.
Condensation just dripping from the ceiling, a totally different world for him.
Completely. The club DJ even gets on the PA and announces to the screaming crowd, "Mr. Brian Epstein from NEMS is here."
And what does he see on stage? Because they were not wearing the famous matching suits yet, right?
Oh, they were incredibly rough. Scuffed black leather jackets, smoking and eating sandwiches mid-song. They were swearing at each other, pretending to physically fight.
On paper, Brian should have been absolutely horrified by that.
He probably was, a little bit, but he was totally mesmerized by their charisma. They had this savage wit, and he saw that raw diamond. He told his assistant over lunch, "I think they're tremendous."
But to sell them to mainstream London society, he had to completely overhaul them. He hands them a list of non-negotiable demands, right?
Oh yeah, no leather jackets, no smoking or swearing on stage. They had to plan their set lists.
I have to push back on that strategy, though. Wasn't putting these gritty rock guys into matching mohair suits an enormous risk? He could have completely killed their authentic edge.
It was a huge gamble. John Lennon fought him hard on it. He loved the leather. But Brian knew that TV producers and record execs back then were conservative older men.
If you look like a street gang, they just don't let you in the building.
Exactly. And John eventually gave in. He famously said, "I'll wear a bloody balloon if somebody's going to pay me." So Brian takes him to a master tailor, Ben O'Dorn, to get suited up.
Which leads to them signing a management contract in early 1962. He takes a 10 to 25% cut. But the crazy part is, Brian didn't even sign the document himself.
He refused to sign it. He told the boys if they ever wanted out, they could just tear it up and walk away.
Yeah.
He was already paying for their gear out of pocket, but he wanted their loyalty based on trust, not a legal trap.
That is a total masterclass in psychology. So the suits get them in the door, but getting a record deal was a nightmare. They just got rejected everywhere.
Relentlessly.
Yeah.
Columbia, Pi, Philips. The absolute worst was Decca Records.
Yeah.
Dick Rowe rejected them, saying guitar groups are on the way out.
Wow, one of the worst predictions in music history.
Right. But Brian doesn't quit. He gets their audition tapes pressed onto physical discs and somehow gets them to George Martin at EMI's Parlophone label.
And George Martin wasn't even blown away by their music at first, was he?
No, he made comedy records. But he liked their personalities, and Brian just wore them down. They got a terrible deal, though. 1 penny per record, split 4 ways among the band.
Brutal. But hey, it's a foot in the door. Then George Martin drops a bomb. He hates their drummer, Pete Best, and wants a studio session guy instead.
Yeah, this caused a massive crisis. John, Paul, and George already felt Pete was limited musically, and he didn't really fit in socially. They wanted Ringo's star.
But they don't fire him themselves, do they? They just cowardly make Brian do it.
Totally avoided it. They left the dirty work to Brian, and he agonized over it because Pete was so popular with the fans. But in August 1962, he called Pete into his office and dropped the axe.
I see Brian as a literal heat shield for the band there. He absorbed the friction, the fans rioted at the Cavern, George Harrison got a black eye, but Brian took the heat so the boys could keep their hands clean.
Yeah, he protected them. And with Ringo, the lineup was locked.
Beatlemania explodes globally, but Brian's lack of experience starts to show, especially with merchandising during the U.S. invasion.
Oh man, the self-tape disaster. It is one of the biggest financial fumbles ever. Everyone in America wanted Beatles wigs and lunchboxes, and Brian was just overwhelmed.
Because global music merchandising wasn't really a thing in the UK yet. So Brian hands it to his lawyer, David Jacobs, who sets up Seltape, which is just Beatles spelled backwards, and Jacobs gives away 90% of the U.S. rights.
Leaving only 10% for the band and Brian. To a lawyer in 1964, 10% of free money for plastic guitars probably sounded great, but it cost them an estimated $100 million today. Lennon later claimed Brian ripped them off.
Which is unfair, you know. It was just a naive mistake, not malice. The guy was managing the biggest act on earth and inventing the playbook on the fly.
He was drowning, Steve.
Yeah.
And you have to layer that professional stress over a deeply hidden personal life. Being a homosexual man was illegal in Britain then.
Right. It wasn't decriminalized until 1967.
Exactly. Brian was arrested in 1957 for soliciting and later blackmailed. He lived in constant fear of tabloid exposure while standing in the biggest spotlight imaginable.
The psychological toll of that must have been just crushing. Hiding who you are while managing these global megastars.
To cope, he fell into a vicious cycle of pills. Prelude and stimulants to stay awake for the tours, and heavy sedatives called Carbaryl to force himself to sleep.
He also chased adrenaline, right? He became a massive gambler at the Curzon House Club.
Oh, Paul McCartney saw him lose a solid gold Dunhill lighter in a single hand of baccarat. He'd blow thousands of pounds just chasing a distraction from the immense pressure.
And the dynamic shifts completely by 1967. The band stops touring. They're recording Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Brian feels untethered. He's spending time in a clinic trying to kick the pills.
Which leads to the tragic end. August bank holiday weekend, 1967. Brian is 32. He goes home to London alone, sounds groggy on the phone with his assistant, and never calls back.
They break his door down 2 days later, dead from an accidental overdose of Carbaryl and alcohol.
The coroner ruled it accidental, yeah.
Right.
His tolerance was huge, but the combination was fatal. And the Beatles were away in Wales. They didn't even go to his Jewish funeral in Liverpool.
Which sounds harsh, but they wanted to avoid making it a media circus, right?
Exactly, out of respect for his grieving mother. But George Harrison had a friend, Nat Weiss, throw a newspaper-wrapped chrysanthemum onto the coffin, since flowers are strictly forbidden at Jewish funerals. A silent goodbye.
Lennon said, "We've bleeping had it now," and McCartney later called him the true fifth Beatle. Without Brian to manage their egos, they just shattered.
He was the parent in the room. He let them just be artists.
He was the conductor of this crazy train. Once he was gone, they started playing out of sync, setting up Apple Corps, suing each other. It's wild.
It definitely makes you wonder how things would have gone if he had survived.
Exactly. And that brings up my final thought for you, the listener. It is the great what if of music history. If Brian Epstein had lived and successfully managed their transition away from touring, would the Beatles have ever broken up? Or was his tragic, sudden exit the exact catalyst that forced them to grow up, take control of their own lives, and ultimately splinter apart? Well, thanks for joining us today. Whenever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. It's the Beatles, all day, every day, 8 days a week. Cass will do it again tomorrow.
Absolutely. See you then.
Until next time.
When you listen,
Your mind conducts its own symphony.